Every year, Australian motorists hand over billions of dollars to workshops they trust, and a significant portion of that money is being taken for work that was never needed, never performed, or deliberately misrepresented on an invoice. This is not speculation. This is what the data shows, what former mechanics have confirmed in interviews with consumer advocates, and what state-based fair trading authorities have been quietly documenting for years while the practice continues at scale. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission received over 4,200 complaints related to automotive servicing in the 12 months to mid-2025. That number represents only the people who knew they had been wronged, took the time to complain, and understood where to direct their grievance. Industry insiders estimate the true rate of consumer harm is somewhere between 5 and 10 times that figure. So when we say this is a systemic problem, we are not reaching for dramatic language. We are reading the room accurately. What follows is a breakdown of the 7 servicing practices that are still running, openly, routinely, and profitably, at Australian workshops in 2026. Some of these will be immediately familiar. Others are sophisticated enough that even mechanically literate drivers have been caught out. All of them are costing Australian households real money, and all of them can be defended against once you understand exactly how they work. The first and most pervasive practice is what the industry quietly calls the phantom flush. This is where a workshop charges a customer for a transmission fluid flush, a brake fluid flush, or a coolant system flush, and either does not perform the service at all or performs a partial flush that replaces perhaps 30% of the old fluid while billing for a complete replacement. A full transmission fluid flush on a Toyota Prado or a Ford Ranger will typically run between $350 and $550 at a non-dealer independent workshop in Brisbane or Perth. The customer has no practical way to verify the work was done. The fluid is sealed inside the gearbox. You cannot see it from under the bonnet. You cannot smell the difference between old fluid and new fluid unless you are trained to do so. Former workshop technicians who have spoken to consumer advocacy groups in Victoria and Queensland have described being instructed by service managers to bill for full flushes, while performing only drain and fill procedures that cost a fraction of the labor and materials. The customer gets an invoice that says flush completed. The job that was actually done is a 20-minute task billed as a 60-minute procedure. Multiply that across even a modest suburban workshop processing 15 vehicles a day, and the numbers become extraordinary very quickly. The story becomes significantly more troubling when you consider that this phantom flush problem is not limited to independent operators. State-based automotive industry regulators in New South Wales and Queensland have both substantiated complaints against franchise-affiliated workshops, the kind with branded signage and manufacturer logos above the door, where fluid service upsells were being sold to customers who were told their vehicle's onboard diagnostics had flagged the need for an immediate service. In several documented cases, those vehicles were relatively new: a 2023 Mitsubishi Outlander with 42,000 kilometers, a 2022 Hyundai Tucson with 38,000 kilometers, well within manufacturer service intervals that did not require any flush at that mileage. The upsell was manufactured from nothing. And what makes this situation even more troubling is that phantom work does not stop at fluids. The second practice that continues to run across Australian workshops is the air filter swap scam, but specifically in its modern, evolved form. The old version of this con was simple: show the customer a dirty air filter pulled from a dusty display shelf, not from their actual vehicle, and charge them $40 to $80 for a replacement they did not need. Workshops learned years ago that customers have become alert to that particular trick, so the practice has adapted. Now, in many cases, technicians are pulling the customer's legitimate air filter, which may have months of service life remaining, presenting it as compromised, replacing it without authorization, and adding the charge to the invoice buried between other line items. A cabin air filter replacement for a Mazda CX-5 retails around $35 to $50 for the part alone. Workshops are charging between $90 and $140 installed. When you consider that some workshop management software now automatically flags air filter replacements as an upsell prompt at every second service, regardless of actual filter condition, you begin to understand how this has become an automated revenue line rather than a genuine diagnostic recommendation. A family in suburban Melbourne driving a 2021 Kia Sorento with mostly highway kilometers is not going to have a degraded air filter at 45,000 Ks. But if the software flags it and the service advisor doesn't push back, that family is walking out having paid for something their car did not need. Where the financial impact becomes genuinely severe is with the tire rotation and balance phantom. This sits differently from the fluid flush problem because tires are visible, you would think. But the practice works because rotation and balancing leaves almost no verifiable trace. A customer drops their 2024 Toyota Hilux in for a 60,000 kilometer service. The service sheet includes tire rotation and rebalance. The charge is typically between $80 and $160 depending on the workshop and the vehicle. The tires are not moved, or they are moved but not balanced, or they are balanced using a machine that the technician operates for 90 seconds per wheel instead of the 3 to 4 minutes required for an accurate balance. The customer collects their vehicle. It drives fine, because if the tires were in reasonable condition before the service, they will continue to drive fine after. There is no symptom of the emission, no warning light, no audible clue. You would need to mark your tires before dropping the vehicle off, a practice that NRMA and RASCQ have both explicitly recommended in their consumer guidance documents, to have any chance of detecting it. In high-volume workshops processing 40 to 60 vehicles per day, former employees have described this as a numbers game. Skip the rotation on 10 vehicles. Pocket the labor margin. Move on. Nobody calls back. But that practice pales in comparison to the diagnostic fee exploitation that has become one of the most lucrative and legally murky revenue streams in the Australian automotive service industry. When a vehicle's check engine light illuminates, whether it is a 2020 Subaru Forester in Adelaide or a 2019 Holden Commodore in regional New South Wales, the workshop connects a scan tool, reads the fault codes, and typically charges between $150 and $350 for this diagnostic procedure before any actual repair work begins. The legitimate justification for this fee is straightforward. Skilled labor, specialized equipment, time. The scam emerges in two distinct forms. The first is where the diagnostic fee is charged and the fault code interpretation provided is either wrong or deliberately vague, designed to lead the customer toward a more expensive repair pathway than the fault actually warrants. A P0420 catalyst efficiency code on a Toyota Camry does not automatically mean the catalytic converter needs replacement. It could mean an oxygen sensor, an exhaust leak, or a software update. But a customer told their catalytic converter is failing and facing a replacement quote of $1,200 to $2,200 is unlikely to dispute it on the spot. The second form is where the diagnostic fee is charged in addition to the repair cost. Then a second diagnostic fee is charged when the initial repair does not resolve the issue, an outcome the technician may have known was likely from the beginning. Australian consumer law provides protections around this, but they require the customer to actively invoke them, and most people do not know the relevant provisions exist. The story becomes significantly worse when you look at the logbook servicing exploitation targeting newer vehicles. This is where a workshop, particularly one that is not a factory-authorized dealer, performs a service and stamps the logbook, but does not use genuine or equivalent specification parts and fluids. This matters enormously because Australian consumer law and manufacturer warranty provisions are nuanced on this point. You're legally entitled to have your vehicle serviced at any licensed workshop without voiding your warranty, provided the service is performed to manufacturer specification. The phrase "to manufacturer specification" is doing enormous lifting there. A workshop that stamps a 2023 Isuzu MUX logbook after using a non-specification oil filter and an engine oil that does not meet the required viscosity and additive standard has technically voided the grounds on which a warranty claim could be defended. But the customer has no way of knowing this until a warranty claim is refused. The documentation looks correct. The logbook looks stamped. The invoice lists the service items. What it does not list is the specification code of the oil used or the origin of the filter. When that MUX develops a turbocharger issue at 90,000 kilometers and the owner drives from Perth to the dealer expecting a warranty repair, the discovery that non-compliant parts were used puts them in an extremely difficult and expensive position. Isuzu, Mitsubishi, and Toyota have all been party to warranty disputes in Australia where non-compliant service parts were the central issue. The customer caught in the middle typically faces a legal process that costs them more than the repair itself. And connected directly to this is the unnecessary parts replacement practice that continues to operate in plain sight. A tradie running a 2021 Ford Ranger in Queensland takes it in for a service. The brake inspection comes back flagging front rotors and pads as requiring immediate replacement. The quote is $850. The tradie, who needs the Ute on the road, agrees. The parts may genuinely need replacement, or the pads may be at 8 millimeters, well above the minimum threshold, and the rotors may be within specification. Unless the customer crawls under the vehicle before and after, they have no reference point. What makes this particularly difficult to address is that brake wear is legitimately variable and legitimately subjective within a range. A technician can look at a pad at 8 millimeters and honestly describe it as wearing. The question is whether the recommendation to replace now is driven by the vehicle's actual safety condition or by the workshop's monthly parts revenue target. In franchise workshop networks, parts sales targets are real, documented, and in some cases directly tied to service advisor bonuses. A former service advisor who left a major national chain in 2024 described the internal pressure in terms that left no ambiguity. Certain services had to be presented as urgent to hit the numbers. The language around break recommendations was specifically flagged as a conversion opportunity in internal training materials. What rounds this out as a complete picture of systematic extraction is the warranty work delay and substitution practice that operates at the interface between manufacturers and service networks. When a vehicle is within the manufacturer's warranty period and a fault is identified that should be covered, some workshops, particularly those balancing dealer margin pressure, will attempt to reclassify the fault as maintenance-related rather than warranty-related. A 2022 Hyundai Santa Fe owner in Sydney, whose differential begins making noise at 65,000 kilometers, is told the issue is the result of inadequate lubrication, a maintenance matter, rather than a component defect, a warranty matter. The repair cost is $4,200 out of pocket versus $0 under warranty. The distinction between those two outcomes is entirely in how the fault is described on the repair order. The workshop has significant influence over that description. Hyundai Australia, Kia Australia, and Toyota Australia have all had formal complaints lodged through the Australian Financial Complaints Authority and state-based tribunals involving exactly this kind of reclassification. In several New South Wales civil and administrative tribunal hearings, workshop operators were found to have misrepresented the nature of faults in ways that materially benefited their own repair revenue at the direct expense of the consumer. Understanding all of this is genuinely useful, but only if you translate it into practical behavior the next time you walk into a workshop. The most effective single step any Australian motorist can take is to photograph their vehicle's tires, brakes where visible through the wheel spokes, and any accessible fluid reservoirs before dropping the vehicle off. This takes 4 minutes. It establishes a baseline. It changes the dynamic of the conversation when you collect your vehicle, and a new service item appears on the invoice that you did not discuss when you dropped off. The second step is to ask every workshop, before any work begins, to provide a written quote, not an estimate, for the agreed service. Under Australian consumer law, a written quote is binding. An estimate is not. That distinction matters when the invoice comes back $240 higher than what you were expecting. The third is to cross-reference any recommended additional work against your vehicle's manufacturer's service schedule, which is available through the manufacturer's website or via the physical logbook. If the workshop is recommending a transmission flush at 55,000 kilometers on a vehicle whose manufacturer's schedule does not call for it until 100,000, you have the basis of a very clear conversation. The drive intel exists because these conversations need data behind them, and because the Australian automotive service industry, for all the legitimate and honest operators within it, has systemic problems that are not self-correcting. The workshops running these practices are not going to stop voluntarily. The regulatory framework catches some of them, some of the time, when consumers report and pursue. The most powerful protection available to Australian motorists is not a regulator. It is information. Know what your vehicle actually needs, know what the law actually provides, and know that when something on an invoice does not feel right, that instinct is worth investigating before you swipe your card.